Imagine walking into your kitchen, opening the refrigerator, and finding that the steak you bought on Tuesday has turned a dull, grayish brown. You might wrinkle your nose, toss it into the trash, and order takeout on your phone without a second thought. Your survival is completely decoupled from that single piece of spoiled meat. But 20,000 years ago, deep in the grip of a brutal ice age winter, discovering that your food supply had spoiled wasn't an inconvenience. It was an absolute catastrophe. Imagine it's mid-January. A howling blizzard is screaming outside your turf hut, dropping the temperature far below zero. Hunting on the frozen tundra is entirely impossible. The migratory herds have vanished, and stepping outside means freezing to death in minutes. Your entire tribe, your elders, your children, your hunters, is completely reliant on a hidden cache of dried mammoth meat and fat stored months ago during the autumn harvest. You pull away the heavy stones sealing the cache, break through the frozen earth, and lift the leather bundles, only to be hit by a wave of sour, putrid rot. Warm moisture got in. Insects breached the seal. The food that was supposed to keep 20 people alive until the spring thaw is gone. In the prehistoric winter, a ruined food cache was an immediate death sentence. It triggered a ruthless countdown against starvation, forcing ancient humans into a desperate psychological and physical battle. They had to choose between eating lethal toxins, executing radical survival strategies, or turning to extreme, stomach-churning culinary engineering. 1. Weaponized fermentation, the high meat strategy. Here is the first major revelation about ancient survival. Our ancestors didn't always look at rotting meat the way we do. Today, we see green discoloration or smell an off odor and think bacteria. They looked at it and saw an alternative form of cooking. When a winter cache spoiled due to moisture, it often didn't rot completely. Instead, it underwent a process of advanced anaerobic fermentation. In northern latitudes, ancient humans actively harnessed this rather than fighting it. If a cache of meat or fish began to decompose under the frozen earth, they didn't throw it away. They consumed it as what is anthropologically known as high meat. By burying meat in a cold, oxygen-deprived environment beneath the permafrost, specific strains of ambient bacteria would slowly break down the tough muscle fibers, predigesting the proteins, and infusing the meat with massive amounts of vitamin C and essential probiotics. To a modern palate, the smell and texture would cause instant gagging. But to an Ice Age human, this heavily fermented, pungent meat was a life-saving delicacy that could be eaten raw without using precious firewood. It provided an instant, easily digestible hit of calories and prevented scurvy when fresh green vegetation was entirely non-existent. 2. Bone greasing, the micronutrient extraction. But what happened if the meat wasn't just fermented? What if it was completely ruined, overrun by lethal molds and maggots that made it entirely inedible? The tribe would strip the rotting flesh away and salvage the only part of the animal that resisted decomposition, the skeleton. When the winter food spoiled, ancient humans initiated a grueling, hours-long emergency process known as bone greasing. They would gather every stored bone from previous hunts, mammoth ribs, bison femurs, reindeer knuckles, and use heavy stone hammers to smash them into tiny, splintered fragments the size of coins. They would then dump these bone fragments into large skins or bark vessels filled with water and throw fire-heated stones directly into the liquid to bring it to a rolling boil. As the bone fragments boiled, the intense heat forced the highly prized yellow marrow and hidden cellular lipids out of the matrix of the bone. The fat would float to the surface as a thick, golden grease. The hunters would carefully skim this grease off the top and store it. Bone grease is pure, concentrated, sterile fat. It can keep for months without spoiling, and in the dead of winter, a single handful of bone grease provided the dense caloric fuel needed to keep a human heart pumping for days when there was absolutely nothing else to eat. 3. Rabbit starvation, the lean meat trap. Let's say the cache is totally lost, the bones are boiled dry, and the tribe is forced to send a desperate hunting party out into the freezing wind to find fresh food. If they were lucky, they might trap small winter game, like Arctic hares, squirrels, or lean winter deer. But this triggered a terrifying physiological trap known to survivalists as rabbit starvation, protein poisoning. The human metabolism cannot survive on lean protein alone. Your liver can only process a certain amount of protein per day before it fails to convert it into energy, leading to a toxic buildup of ammonia in the bloodstream. To survive, the human body must have fat or carbohydrates. Arctic hares and small winter game have almost 0% body fat in the winter. If an ancient tribe tried to survive solely on fresh, lean rabbit meat because their fatty winter caches had spoiled, they would experience severe diarrhea, extreme fatigue, and a bizarre, insatiable hunger. They could gorge themselves on pounds of meat every single day, yet their bodies would literally starve to death on a cellular level because of the lack of fat. To counter this, if their primary fatty caches were gone, hunters would carefully crack open the skulls of the small game to consume the fat-rich brains and eat the fatty tissue behind the eyeballs, just to keep their protein-to-fat ratios balanced. 4. The last resort emergency buffers. If the hunting failed and the starvation became acute, the tribe turned to things that were barely considered food, executing their absolute last resort emergency protocols. Boiled leather gear. They would take their structural leather ropes, discarded caribou hide blankets, and even old, worn-out moccasins, strip them of hair, and boil them for hours over a fire. The boiling process broke down the collagen in the animal hides, turning the leather into a thick, rubbery, gelatinous broth. It tasted awful and offered minimal nutrition, but it provided enough basic gelatin to trick the stomach into stopping its agonizing hunger contractions. The inner pine bark. In forested subarctic regions, humans would use flint knives to scrape away the rough, outer bark of pine, birch, or spruce trees. They were looking for the cambium layer, the soft, moist, white inner bark that transports nutrients through the tree. This inner bark can be eaten raw, boiled into a starchy mush, or dried and pounded into a rough flour. It provided a small, vital hit of carbohydrates that could prevent rabbit starvation and keep the digestive system moving. The ultimate lesson of the cache. When you look at the survival strategies of our ancestors, you realize that managing food spoilage wasn't just about cooking techniques. It was a profound test of collective intelligence. If a tribe's winter food spoiled, it wasn't just a failure of the meat. It was a failure of engineering. It meant they hadn't sealed the clay correctly, or they hadn't lined the cache with enough insulating pine boughs, or they had miscalculated the shifting temperatures of the earth. The elders would analyze the failure, modifying their preservation techniques for the next autumn harvest so the mistake would never happen again. The comfort we enjoy today, where a spoiled item in our fridge is nothing more than a minor annoyance, was built on thousands of years of trial, error, and immense suffering. Our ancestors looked into dark, rotting winter caches, faced the terrifying prospect of starvation, and used absolute grit and biological ingenuity to find a way to make it through to the spring.